So here's why I think worker cooperatives are the next normal. My hope is to get us all fired up. And the reason is that the current normal is not sustainable. And our economic system is playing out so much like the game of Monopoly. And Monopoly is a game that's designed to eventually end with most people not having anything. And so already we have a situation where 93% of the wealth in the United States is controlled by the top 20%. And what's currently at play on the monopoly board, or what's about to be at play, are the businesses owned by baby boomers. And baby boomers also own half the farmland, about half the housing wealth. And so these are essential assets for our survival, and the fate of these assets is really being determined in a game of monopoly. And then so we're really going to kind of collapse under the weight of inequality unless we change the rules of the game and create a new normal. And of course, racial inequality is going to go off the charts because most of the wealthiest 20% of people are white. And so racial inequality on the charts is already pretty devastating, with white households having 13 times more wealth than black households on average. So that's all depressing. So, by the way, I'm a very visual person, and so welcome to my visual world. I picture conventional businesses as squares. And the reason is that there's something kind of square and predictable about conventional business structures, in that the person with the most money tends to get the most power and most profits, and then if a business is for sale, the highest bidder gets it. So you can kind of predict also what would happen when baby boomers start to sell their businesses, which is that the highest bidders are very well positioned to swallow them up, and we're just going to see more extremes of wealth concentration and ownership concentration. And so creating more small squares, so supporting small businesses, retaining small businesses, is an important piece of the puzzle, although if we do so with a conventional square structure, we're still positioning it to eventually be potentially swallowed up by the highest bidders when succession planning is necessary. So we need new rules of the game, we need a new shape of businesses, and so meet community assets. Here's our new shape. And a community asset is a business that, first of all, is designed to not be swallowed up by square, so it's not a commodity that can just get sold on the market. And it also is designed to spread wealth and spread power as opposed to concentrating it in the hands of the highest bidders. And so what I'm seeing in the world of cooperative conversions is kind of a spectrum of motivations for why people are wanting to convert businesses to co-ops. And my organization, Sustainable Economies Law Center, is really placed on that end of the spectrum because our clients really expressly want to move away from the predominant economic system and economic structures. And then we also hear a lot of businesses where the main goal of conversion is to preserve the business in the community. And the reason I bring up this spectrum is that wherever a conversion falls on that spectrum is really going to determine what are the steps involved in that conversion. It could even determine what laws apply as far as tax and employment law. And some conversions will follow a fairly clear step-by-step process, whereas other conversions, if we view conversions as a pathway to true societal transformation, are going to be far more complex, but also very interesting and awesome and doable. So I'm going to use an example of my client, Three Stone Hearth in Berkeley. They're a very successful food business, and over the last 10 years, they've been transitioning to full worker ownership by all 40 plus employees. And so they also embody, to me, the different key elements of being a community asset. And one of those is that part of their legal structure is designed to keep them rooted in the community and not just be sold in the open market. So there are people with veto power over any attempts to sell the business. There's also protections to prevent any one individual from profiting substantially from the sale of the business. So it stays rooted. The second quality is that it helps spread wealth. And cooperatives naturally spread wealth because when you don't have one person who can stand to profit limitlessly from the work of others, there's no incentive to squeeze as much as possible out of workers. Rather, there's actually an incentive to give as much back to workers. But even within cooperatives, there's still the potential that kind of a square way of thinking could take control, and that certain people could vie for positions of power and implement inequitable pay hierarchies. And so cooperatives can limit that by putting a cap on what any individual can earn, by creating narrow pay ratios. So at Three Stone Hearth, the founders, so these are the founders on the left, they took a pay cut in order to bring in more owners and in order to narrow the pay ratio. There's also a limit on what people can get when they leave the cooperative, because basically they're not getting the fair market value of the business, because it's a really an irrelevant concept in a cooperative where you don't ever intend to sell on the market. So also power is distributed, and power can really start to free up and move around when you move away from conventional hierarchies that basically allocate power based on people's job descriptions. But here's an important piece, which is that a lot of times people, when you think about moving away from hierarchy, what people picture is people sitting in circles for long periods of time trying to come to painful decisions by consensus. And I wanted to emphasize that because I think it's a sticking point for cooperative conversions, which is that people can't figure out, well, what does governance and management, what does that look like if we convert to a cooperative? And I just want to say there's a universe of possibilities. Three Stone Hearth uses a governance structure called holacracy. One of the things that holacracy does is it spreads power throughout the organization to small committees, and then those committees are able to move the power and functions around pretty dynamically. And it's a much more complex system than that, but it's very well thought out. And a lot of businesses right now are finding that management structure to be really useful. There's a really good book called Reinventing Organizations that profiles 16 pretty large companies around the world that use decentralized governance. So in a world where inequality could literally destroy us, we have this opportunity to look around at the businesses that exist in our communities and then ask, how can we transform those businesses into basically machines that generate more and more equity, where we create more equitable distribution of power, which leads more naturally to more equitable distribution of pay and wealth. And of course, the challenge is we're creating cooperatives when what is surrounding us in the predominant economic system is sort of conventional business structure. So it's not always going to be easy. So I have to emphasize we have to build a movement, which includes building a movement of consumers that really go out of their way to support worker-owned cooperatives. This is an organization I created late last year called Co-opivore to get people to really aggregate the consumer dollars to protect and support food businesses that are worker co-ops. We need a movement of investors who are taking some of their money out of Wall Street and investing it in local co-ops. We need a movement in policy making to remove barriers to and to create incentives for worker cooperatives. And the good news is that, I started this whole presentation basically with the apocalypse, that everything was going to collapse, but that is under the current rules of the current game. And community assets and cooperatives basically implement totally different rules. So we have a real opportunity to basically avoid that apocalypse. And I'm just going to end with a really kind of a bad pun, but it's also kind of a genuine truth, which is that if we start to change the rules of the game, we can avoid apocalypse by creating a co-apocalypse.